The first thing Nia saw when she woke up that morning was her reflection staring back at her from the cracked bathroom mirror. She hated it, the way the jagged lines sliced through her face, splitting her into two imperfect halves. It wasn't just the mirror. Everything about her life felt fractured lately. Her marriage to Kofi had grown stale, like yesterday's jollof rice left out too long under the sun, once vibrant and full of flavor, now dry and unappetizing. And then there was her sister Akojua. Always smiling, always perfect, always lurking somewhere just beyond the edge of Nia's vision. Like a shadow she couldn't quite shake off. Nia sighed heavily, as if exhaling could somehow push away the weight pressing down on her chest. She cupped her hands under the faucet and splashed cold water onto her face, letting the droplets linger for a moment before wiping them away with a threadbare towel. The water did nothing to wash away the unease gnawing at her insides. Outside, the sounds of Accra buzzed alive. Honking turotros weaving recklessly through traffic, vendors shouting their wares with rhythmic cadence, children laughing as they darted barefoot down dusty streets. Life pulsed everywhere except within the walls of their small flat. Inside, silence reigned. A heavy, suffocating kind of quiet that pressed against Nia's chest every time she walked past Kofi's study or heard Akojua's voice over the phone. That voice. It slithered into her thoughts without permission. Soft and sweet but laced with something sharper, something probing. "Are you coming over today?" Akojua had asked last night, her tone light yet deliberate, like a fisherman casting a net. "I made banku and okra stew. You know how much Kofi loves my cooking." Nia remembered forcing a laugh, pretending not to notice the way Kofi's eyes lingered on the phone during the call. His expression unreadable but tinged with what? Longing? Guilt? Something else entirely? She'd smiled tightly, swallowing the bitterness rising in her throat. "Sure," she'd said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "We'll be there." But now, standing in front of the broken mirror, Nia wondered if she should go at all. Her fingers traced the jagged crack running diagonally across the glass, following its path as though it might lead her somewhere, to clarity perhaps or escape. Instead, all she found was herself reflected back, fragmented and distorted. One half of her face looked sharp, almost angry, while the other seemed softer, sadder. Both were strangers to her now. She thought about Akojua again. The way her sister carried herself with an effortless grace that made people gravitate toward her. Akojua was magnetic, radiant, the kind of woman who lit up rooms simply by walking into them. Nia used to admire that about her. Even envied it sometimes, but lately those feelings had curdled into something darker. Suspicion, resentment, fear. And Kofi. Oh, Kofi. How could he not see what was happening? Or worse, did he see it and choose to ignore it? His late-night excuses, the faint scent of perfume clinging to his shirts, the way his gaze lingered too long whenever Akojua visited. It all pointed to something Nia didn't want to name. Yet here she was, caught between denial and dread, staring at her fractured reflection and wondering how deep the cracks really went. For a fleeting moment, Nia considered smashing the mirror altogether. What would happen if she shattered it completely, reduced it to shards scattered across the tiled floor? Would the act free her somehow, break the spell of this suffocating existence? Or would it only make things worse, leaving her surrounded by jagged edges she couldn't avoid cutting herself on? Instead, she turned away, grabbing her bag and heading for the door. Whatever truths lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. Staying trapped in this silent flat wouldn't protect her from them. If answers waited at Akojua's house, so be it. Nia would face them head-on, even if it meant confronting the fractures threatening to tear her world apart. Akojua lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, nestled among mango trees whose branches drooped low with ripe fruit. The scent of sun-warmed sweetness hung heavy in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of damp soil and freshly cut grass. It was picturesque, almost too perfect, like something out of a storybook. But Nia couldn't shake the unease prickling at the back of her neck as they pulled up to the gate. When Nia and Kofi arrived, Akojua greeted them with her usual warmth, pulling Nia into a tight embrace that felt both comforting and suffocating all at once. Then she turned to Kofi, her smile lingering just a second too long, her hand resting lightly on his arm before she finally stepped away. Come in, Akojua said brightly, ushering them inside. "Dinner's ready." The house smelled divine. Spices and simmering tomatoes wafted through the air, wrapping around Nia like an invisible thread, pulling her deeper into the scene. Akojua bustled around the kitchen, serving heaping portions of food onto mismatched plates with practiced ease. Banku and okra stew steamed invitingly, their rich colors vibrant against the chipped ceramic. Kofi leaned back in his chair, savoring each bite. "This is incredible, Akojua," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "You always did have a knack for cooking." Nia sat quietly, picking at her banku, feeling invisible despite being right there at the table. Her fork hovered over her plate, but she couldn't bring herself to eat. Every laugh, every compliment, every glance between Kofi and Akojua felt like another brick added to the wall, slowly closing her off from them. "You've lost weight," Akojua said suddenly, tilting her head as she studied Nia. Her tone was casual, almost playful, but there was an undercurrent to it, a probing curiosity that made Nia stiffen. "Are you eating enough? Or is something bothering you?" Nia froze, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Was this some kind of game? Did Akojua know? Could she see the cracks widening between Nia and Kofi, feel the tension coiling beneath the surface like a snake ready to strike? "No," Nia replied curtly, forcing a tight smile. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't. Not really. And later, when Kofi excused himself to help Akojua clear the dishes, leaving Nia alone in the living room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silence pressed in on her, thick and suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of crickets outside and the faint clinking of dishes in the kitchen. Nia stared at the empty doorway, straining to hear their voices beyond the walls. Were they laughing? Whispering? Sharing secrets she wasn't meant to overhear? Her chest tightened, and for a moment she considered following them, to confront whatever was happening, to demand answers, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. Instead, she sat there, surrounded by the remnants of dinner, feeling more isolated than ever. It wasn't just the food left untouched on her plate or the lingering scent of spices in the air. It was the growing certainty that the life she thought she knew was slipping through her fingers like grains of sand, no matter how hard she tried to hold on. Months passed, and the distance between Nia and Kofi only grew wider. He spent more nights working late than ever before, his excuses becoming flimsier with each passing week. When he did come home, his shirt smelled faintly of perfume, not hers. It was a scent she didn't recognize, floral yet sharp, lingering on the fabric like an accusation. Meanwhile, Akojua called less frequently. Her voice always hurried when she did, claiming she was busy with work and other obligations. Something didn't add up, but Nia couldn't put her finger on what. Then one evening, as Nia scrolled absently through social media, a habit she'd picked up to fill the silence at home, she stumbled upon a photo that stopped her cold. Her thumb froze mid-swipe, hovering over the screen as if afraid to move further. It was Akojua, glowing in a yellow sundress that hugged her frame, cradling what looked unmistakably like a baby bump. Nia's stomach dropped. No, it couldn't be. Her mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of conversations, moments where something had felt off but slipped away before she could grasp it fully. The late-night calls, the lingering smiles, the way Kofi's eyes lit up whenever Akojua's name came up. Desperate for answers, Nia confronted Akojua the next day. They met at a cafe downtown, tucked into a corner booth far from prying ears. The air was thick with tension, made heavier by the clinking of teaspoons against porcelain cups and the low murmur of other patrons. Akojua fidgeted nervously with her napkin, folding and unfolding it until it resembled a crumpled mess. "Why are you doing this?" Nia asked finally, her voice trembling. "Why now? Why here?" Akojua hesitated, her lips parting slightly as though searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she admitted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's Kofi's." For a moment Nia couldn't breathe. The world tilted sideways, colors blurring at the edges as though reality itself were cracking under the weight of the truth. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, her knuckles white against the polished wood. Betrayal burned hot in her veins, a searing flame that threatened to consume her whole. But beneath the fire lay another emotion, one she hadn't expected: pity. Because Akojua looked so small, so fragile, sitting across from her with haunted eyes. This wasn't the confident, radiant woman Nia knew. This was someone else entirely. Someone broken and scared. "What are you going to do?" Nia asked finally, her voice barely audible over the din of the cafe. Akojua shook her head, her hands trembling as she wiped away tears. "I don't know," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen." Her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished, hanging in the air like smoke. Nia stared at her sister, torn between anger and sorrow, betrayal and compassion. For all the pain Akojua had caused, there was no denying the fear etched into every line of her face. The revelation should have shattered Nia completely, but strangely it didn't. Instead, it left her hollow, emptied out, as though some invisible dam inside her had burst, washing away everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, her family. And yet, amidst the wreckage, a question began to form in her mind, one she wasn't ready to ask but couldn't ignore. What happens now? 9 months later, Akojua gave birth to a boy, or rather something extraordinary. When Nia arrived at the hospital, she found Akojua lying pale and exhausted in the sterile glow of the recovery room. Her sister looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what had just transpired but still radiating an aura of quiet strength. In her arms she cradled a bundle wrapped tightly in white cloth, its edges frayed and unassuming. Nia hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach or retreat. But then Akojua glanced up, meeting her gaze with eyes that were weary yet resolute. Wordlessly, she motioned for Nia to come closer. As Nia stepped forward, Akojua gently unwrapped the blanket, revealing the tiny figure nestled within. And when Nia saw him, really saw him, she gasped, her breath catching in her throat like a bird trapped in a cage. The baby had 3 arms. 2 sprouted normally from his shoulders, perfectly proportioned and strong. But a third emerged midway down his torso, just above his belly button, delicate and impossibly small. Its fingers curled inward like petals of a flower, soft and vulnerable, as though they hadn't yet decided whether to bloom or stay closed. Nurses hovered nearby, whispering among themselves behind cupped hands, their voices low and urgent. Doctors scribbled notes on clipboards, their expressions unreadable masks of clinical detachment. Yet none of them seemed to see what Nia saw, not just a medical anomaly but a miracle. "He's perfect," Akojua murmured, brushing a kiss against the baby's forehead. Her voice trembled, fragile as glass, but there was no mistaking the love in her eyes. It shone brighter than any judgment, fiercer than any fear. Nia stared, unable to look away. This child, this miracle, was both a reminder of betrayal and a symbol of something greater. Resilience, survival, the unyielding force of life itself. Here was proof that even amidst chaos and heartbreak, beauty could emerge. That even broken things could create something new, something unexpected. And as she gazed at the baby, an idea began to form in her mind. A flicker of possibility that grew stronger with each passing second. What if this wasn't the end of everything? What if it was the beginning of something else entirely? Her thoughts raced ahead, piecing together fragments of a future she hadn't dared to imagine before now. A future where forgiveness might be possible, not because it was easy but because it was necessary. Where wounds could heal not by forgetting, but by transforming pain into purpose. For the first time in months, Nia felt something other than anger or despair. She felt hope. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing the baby's tiny hand, the one with 5 perfect fingers curled inward like a secret waiting to be told. And as his grip closed around her fingertip, ever so lightly, she knew, this child would change everything. In the weeks that followed, Nia made a decision that shocked everyone, including herself. She packed her belongings, left the small flat she had shared with Kofi, and moved in with Akojua to help care for the baby, whom they named Kwame. It was a choice born not of obligation but of necessity, an unspoken understanding between 2 women bound by blood and betrayal. Together, the sisters navigated the challenges of raising a child who defied convention, finding strength in each other even as they grappled with their shared pain. Kofi, meanwhile, faded into the background, unable or unwilling to cope with the fallout of his actions. He sent money occasionally, a meager attempt at redemption, but his presence became little more than a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. His absence was palpable yet strangely liberating, like the echo of a storm that had finally passed, leaving behind only silence and the faint scent of rain. As for Kwame, he grew into a spirited toddler, full of curiosity and energy. His extra arm became both a tool and a marvel, allowing him to climb higher, reach farther, and explore deeper than any ordinary child could. People stared, of course, some with wonder, others with pity or disdain, but Nia and Akojua held their heads high, refusing to let judgment define them. They dressed him in bright colors, celebrated every milestone, and shielded him from the world's cruelty with unwavering love. One day, as Nia watched Kwame chase butterflies in the garden, she realized something profound. Sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from the deepest wounds. Life, after all, has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. The same cracks that once threatened to destroy her had become pathways for light, illuminating corners of her heart she hadn't known existed. Kwame stumbled toward a cluster of daisies, his 3 arms flailing comically as he tried to catch a particularly elusive butterfly. When he finally gave up and plopped down onto the grass, giggling uncontrollably, Nia couldn't help but laugh along with him. In that moment, surrounded by the simple joys of childhood, she felt a peace she hadn't thought possible. A peace rooted not in perfection but in acceptance. And so, amidst the chaos and heartache, Nia found solace. Not in spite of the cracks but because of them. For it was those very fractures that let the light shine through. The house on the outskirts of town, once a place of tension and secrets, transformed into a sanctuary filled with laughter and resilience. Mango trees still drooped low with ripe fruit, casting dappled shadows over the yard where Kwame played. Inside, mismatched plates lined the shelves, remnants of meals cooked together by 2 sisters learning to forgive themselves and each other. Nia often thought about how life had rewritten its script without asking permission, taking her down paths she never would have chosen. Yet here she was, standing stronger than ever, holding hands with the very people who had once broken her. It wasn't easy. Some days old wounds reopened, and bitterness threatened to creep back in. But then there was Kwame, his tiny fingers reaching out, pulling her back from the brink, reminding her that healing is messy and non-linear but always worth it. For Nia, redemption didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant embracing it, scars and all. And as she stood watching Kwame play under the golden afternoon sun, she knew one thing for certain. Life may break us, but it also gives us the pieces to build something new. Something extraordinary.